Alright, welcome everybody to episode 9 of Ear to the Canvas. This is Ryan Truland. Since I was last on earlier this week, a lot of news has come out. Not surprising, the UFC just seems like it has some relatively big news coming out daily. It's pretty awesome in this time where other sports there's really not much going on. The UFC is very active right now. Obviously, UFC 251, a lot of big news there with Fight Islands. 3 title fights announced, amongst other big fights for that card. Gonna get into that in a bit. Of course, we have UFC this weekend. Not a great card, honestly. It's a fight night. It's free. I think it's on ESPN Plus. Not a great card, but we'll get into it. There's a few interesting fights. The first thing I wanted to get into, though, was this week we had a bunch of things were announced, a bunch of fights were announced, including a lot of title fights. So, and we now know that Stipe DC 3 is happening in August. We know that Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns is happening UFC 251 next month, as well as Alexander Volkanovski versus Matt Holloway 2, also UFC 251. The third title fight, UFC 251, is Jose Aldo versus Peter Yan. That is for the vacant bantamweight belt. So we know Khabib is most likely 100% fighting Gaethje. So most of the weight classes, we pretty much know who the champ is fighting. Izzy at middleweight is probably fighting Costa. What else? Light heavyweight, the only question is John Jones going to be the one fighting? But he's officially still got the light heavyweight belt. Obviously, he'll fight either Dominic Reyes or Jan Blachowicz, probably Reyes, though, if he does end up fighting there at light heavyweight or at all. But it got me thinking, all these title fights have been announced. We know everything, every weight class, what's going on at the top. So I was thinking, what's the most likely belts that are going to change hands? What weight class is going to be first? Or what is most likely with what we know? What's the most likely weight class that we're going to see a belt change? So I ranked them. I obviously excluded flyweight and bantamweight out of this because they're vacant right now due to Cejudo retiring. I included light heavyweight with John Jones because he's still officially the champ. They're at 205. So there's 6 male weight classes that I'm going to rank from 6 to 1. Most likely that we're going to see the belt change hands. So the least likely, number 6, I have light heavyweight John Jones. Now, you probably hear that and say, how is John Jones the least likely to lose his belt when he nearly lost it to Dominic Reyes and he nearly lost it to Thiago Santos in his last 2 defenses? Well, John Jones is the greatest of all time, and I'm not going to doubt him until he gives me a reason to doubt him. He does incredibly well in rematches, as we know. You saw it against Gustafsson. I really do think if him and Dom fight again, I think John Jones is going to have a better performance, a more dominant performance. I don't think it will be as close of a fight. So John Jones, light heavyweight at 6. Other than that, you got Jan, you got Santos. Those are the contenders right now. Very qualified contenders, obviously. Definitely threats. 1 through 6 on this list, there's nobody that's a clear-cut going to retain their belt, but I think John Jones at light heavyweight is the least likely to lose his belt of all the weight classes. Number 5, second least likely to lose their belt, I got Khabib at lightweight. Now we know Khabib is going to be fighting. He's going to be fighting Gaethje. Not an easy matchup for Khabib, obviously. I think it's a tougher matchup than what Conor was for Khabib, because Justin has great takedown defense. He has vicious light kicks, which can just debilitate his opponent, no matter who it is. And of course, you know the power that he has, and you know the will that he has, and he can take a shot. That's going to be a tough fight for Khabib. Tony's also a tough fight for Khabib, tougher than Conor, I think, when you look at it stylistically in the matchup. But still, Khabib's undefeated, and it's another one of those, like John, I'll believe it when I see it. Khabib and John are the least likely to lose their belts, in my opinion, because they haven't lost their belts, ever. I mean, of course, John has had his taken away, but that's totally different. So yeah, lightweight, Khabib, second least likely to lose his belt. Now we move up to number 4. I'd put Israel Adesanya at middleweight. Now we know he's going to be fighting Paulo Costa. The other contenders right there in that division are Whitaker, he's already beaten. Then you got Cannonier, who's definitely pretty scary. And then you got Till. Till's up at middleweight, and he looked good against Gastelum. We'll see. If he beats Whitaker, he'll obviously probably have the next shot, I would think. Cannonier does not have an opponent right now. So, but Izzy he won the belt over, the interim belt over Gastelum in what was one of the best title fights of all time. Showed a chin. He showed the heart of a lion fighting in that 5th round. Just the heart of a superstar. And then he goes and he knocks out Robert Whitaker basically in the 1st round, finished in the 2nd though. And then he didn't really have a dancing partner against Yoel. So I think he will have a dancing partner with Costa. I think Costa's going to put the pressure on Izzy, but Izzy's such a great counter striker. You saw that against Whitaker. I think he's going to, like Brendan Schaub says, I think he's going to light Costa up like a Christmas tree. Honestly, I think there's levels, obviously, to the striking aspects of MMA. There's levels to every aspect. And I think Izzy's obviously just on another level compared to Costa. That's why I put Izzy in middleweight at 4. Yeah, then we move up to welterweight. Now we're getting into the top 3 most likely belts to change hands. I got welterweight at 3 with Usman. Usman's a great champion, and I actually think he will hold his belt for a pretty long time. But you have incredible opponents in that welterweight division. You have Colby, who almost beat Usman. That went into the 5th round, and it was very back and forth. Colby broke his jaw early on in that fight. So the rematch there is very intriguing. Then you got Burns, who Usman will be fighting next month. I think Usman will beat Burns. I do. But there's no doubt that Gilbert is a very worthy opponent and a definite test for Usman. Definite test. You saw what Burns pretty much dominated Woodley at the same level as what Usman did to Woodley, which is interesting now that they're going to fight each other. Both of them have good stand-up game. They're both just good all-around fighters. Obviously, Burns is incredible on the ground. Usman's an incredible wrestler. He's so strong. Both can strike. That's going to be an interesting fight. And then you got Masvidal right there. You got Leon Edwards right there, who's a dark horse. That is a very tough division. And that is why I put welterweight at 3. Now, the second most likely belt to change hands, I have featherweight with Volkanovski. Volk is fighting Max, UFC 251 next month. And it's just so hard to imagine Max Holloway losing back-to-back fights to the same person. when you look at just how dominant he's been over the years. He's honestly, in my opinion, I think a lot of people would agree with this, the best featherweight of all time over Aldo. Yeah, and then you look at the rest of that division. You got Ortega. If he beats Korean Zombie, the winner of that fight will probably get the next title shot. And then you got Zabit right there, who's a tough matchup, I think, for Volkanovski especially. Just a huge size difference, which doesn't always mean that the bigger man will win. As a matter of fact, it's really a pick 'em in that scenario. It just depends who the better fighter is. But I think Zabit is, after another fight, if he gets another win, and then you got Calvin Kattar in that division. You got Yair Rodriguez, but you don't want to go too far down because it's most likely to lose their belt first. And I have Volkanovski at 2 because I like a lot of people could see him losing it next month to Holloway. But if not, then you got Korean Zombie and Ortega right there. Most likely weight class to change hands. I don't think this is really a surprise. I think a lot of people would have this one at number 1 if they did this list. I have heavyweight at number 1 with Stipe. We just got news that Stipe will be fighting DC again for the 3rd time to finish up that trilogy. That'll be DC's last fight. And they've obviously split one apiece. DC KO'd Stipe in the first fight. Stipe finished DC in the second fight. And I think DC is going to be as motivated as he's ever been. I know he wants to go out on top with a win with the heavyweight belt. Even if he wins, he's not going to... this is his last fight. I think if he wins, he's going to take the Cejudo route and go out on top. Not saying that Cejudo is actually retired, because I still think he'll come back, obviously, but... heavyweight is just a very unpredictable division. The belt changes hands more than any other division over the years. It's just because of the power. It's just so unpredictable, that division. Anybody's lights can go out in any second, any fight. And then even if Stipe does get past DC, you got an improved Francis Ngannou. I know Stipe beat him the first time they fought, but I think it'll be a different story if they rematched. I don't think Francis will put him out and like he did with Rosenstrike, because Rosenstrike, the problem was he backed up straight in that sequence, which you just can't do. You gotta evade left or right, stay on your bike. You just can't back up straight, and that's why Ngannou was able to catch Rosenstrike like that and display his power yet again. You also got JDS in that division, who's always tough. You got Curtis Blades. Heavyweight, number 1, most likely belt to change hands. Least likely, light heavyweight, John Jones. Don't doubt him. I'm not going to doubt him or Khabib until I see it. Let's move on to UFC 251. That is going to be happening on Yas Island, which is in Abu Dhabi, aka Fight Island. UFC 251 will have 3 title fights. I mentioned them before: Usman versus Burns, Aldo versus Jan, Holloway versus Volkanovski. You're also going to have Rose Namajunas versus Jessica Andrade 2. If you remember, Andrade finished Rose to get her belt. It'll be Rose's first fight since that fight. You also got Frankie Edgar versus Pedro Munoz, which is a very fun bantamweight matchup. That is a very fun matchup for the main card. And then this one I'm very excited about. I talked about this guy a couple weeks ago on my podcast about being a dark horse in that light heavyweight division, even though he's never fought in the UFC. He's making his UFC debut, Yuri Prochazka. He is fighting Volkan Oezdemir, which is a great matchup. That's a tough matchup in your UFC debut, but I think Yuri is just up for that challenge. We're going to break down the fights on this podcast as we get closer to UFC 251. I'm sure many more great fights will be added to that card. The card is far from being complete, but 3 title fights, you can't say more than that. It's a hell of a way to kick off Fight Island. Can't wait for UFC 251. Early predictions, not even predictions. I think Usman versus Burns, they're teammates. There won't be any bad blood. It'll be a good fight. Very competitive fight. I do think Usman will retain his belt, though, over Burns. I really do. If you look at the second title fight, Volkanovski versus Max, I've already said just prior that I think it's hard to see Max losing to the same guy. I could see him beating Volkanovski, which would set up, I guess they would have to do the trilogy, and the winner of Ortega and Korean Zombie would have to wait. They would have to do the trilogy after that. And then you got the third title fight, which is Jan versus Aldo. Aldo shouldn't be fighting for the bantamweight belt. He just shouldn't. I've already made myself clear on that in the last episode. It should be Sterling versus Jan. But which makes me kind of want Jan to win, just to set up that Jan versus Sterling matchup, who are the 2 best bantamweights right now in the world. Speaking of bantamweights, new rankings, updated rankings are out. Sean O'Malley is ranked. He's 15. I figured he'd be ranked at 15, honestly. Just once you get a number next to your name, there's just that much more hype behind you. So, he did knock off a ranked guy who he, on his podcast, has mentioned intrigue in fighting, and that's Marlon Chito Vera, who was ranked 15. O'Malley expressed interest on his podcast in fighting Vera. He thought it would be a good step up for him. Vera, in his opinion and in mine, beat Sonya Don in that last fight. Kind of got screwed. Sonya Don's ranked at 14. John Dodson's at 13. Rob Font's at 11. I think those 3 guys are possibilities, as well as Marlon Vera. So one of those 4 guys, he's not going to fight Cody Garbrandt. Sean O'Malley's next fight will not be against Cody Garbrandt, who moves all the way up to 5 as expected. Cody's going to fight somebody like Sandhagen. I could see them matching up. Really, I think that's going to be the fight. Either that or he'll fight Moraes. One of those 2. He's not going to fight O'Malley. O'Malley's going to fight one of those guys that I just mentioned, one of those 4. New rankings are out. Other than that, the new rankings, nothing really crazy. Neil Magny's ranked again in the welterweight division, which is cool. Nothing really crazy besides O'Malley entering his name into the rankings. Now, if we look ahead, like I said, this Saturday we got more fights. Every week we're going to have fights. The Fight Island week, I think there's going to be 4 cards in like a 2-week period, something like that. Just churning out events. It's crazy. So this Saturday, UFC Apex once again. The headliner is Jessica Ai versus Cynthia Calvillo. Calvillo is making her debut up at flyweight. She's usually a strawweight. Taking on Jessica Ai. Jessica Ai's pretty good prospect. I know a lot of people judge her probably from that fight against Shevchenko. I'm sure that's the fight that most of people know Jessica Ai from, if they do know her. Because she got outclassed. Who doesn't, honestly? Except Nunez when they fight Shevchenko. She got outclassed. She ended up getting head kicked. Brutal. Then she bounced back with a decision win. And now she's got this upcoming bout against a newcomer to the division, and that's Cynthia Calvillo. Jessica Ai's pretty good. I mean, she beat Caitlin Chukagian. I'm curious to see the size difference. I don't think there'll be a huge size difference. I really don't know who's going to win this fight. I'm not going to bet on it or anything, probably. I know the odds are close. It's almost like a pick 'em, which is interesting. I don't know. Co-main event. Carl Roberson versus Marvin Vettori. This one's pretty interesting. Carl Roberson's a Contender Series prospect. He's got a 9-2 record. He's fought pretty good competition in the UFC early on. He fought Glover Teixeira. He got submitted though early on against him. He beat Jack Marshman. He lost to Cesar Ferreira. He beat Darren Stewart in his UFC debut. Not bad competition. This is the third time they've tried to make this fight, so it's finally happening. Marvin Vettori, a lot of people know. He fought Israel Adesanya, and he fought him well. Lost via decision to Izzy. So he's an interesting prospect. We'll see what he does against a guy like Roberson. It's a pretty good co-main event for a fight night, I guess. Not a lot of ranked guys on this card, honestly. Another weird thing about this card is there's no fights over 185 pounds. In fact, there's only one fight at middleweight, which is the Roberson-Vettori fight. No light heavyweight, no heavyweight fights. So take that as you will, but that's weird to me anyway. You got Ray Borg fighting. That's going to be a pretty good fight against, I don't know how to say his last name. I've seen him fight a few times. Valishvili. I don't know. You got Andre Feely, who's got a funny nickname, Andre Touchy Feely. He's fighting. He's fought a bunch of top featherweights, honestly, in his career. So yeah, nothing crazy on this card. No huge implications even afterwards. The most interesting fight to me is probably the co-main event, Roberson versus Vettori, just to see how Vettori looks. But yeah, UFC, a lot of good shit came out this week in the UFC. So gonna wrap things up here on episode 9. We got episode coming out early next week. We'll have reactions to this card. I'm sure there'll be a ton more news that comes out over the weekend. Probably more fights added to cards like UFC 251 and the other Fight Island cards, I'm sure. Maybe Sean O'Malley will announce his next opponent. I'm sure he's going to make a quick turnaround. So as for Ryan Truland, episode 9 of Ear to the Canvas, please check it out on YouTube. That's the only spot you can find the podcast right now. Also check out backsportspage.com. I have MMA articles posted on there, as well as there's a bunch of other great writers, so please check them out, and enjoy the fights this weekend, and I will be back early next week. Ear to the Canvas, we're out. Alright, let me just take a quick break to tell you guys about our sponsor, Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's an app available to download on your computer, iPhone, or Android, and it's the easiest way to make a podcast. For starters, it's free. Everything's free on Anchor, and it gives you all kinds of tools that allow you to record and edit and create your very own podcast right from your computer or phone. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, man, how do I get my podcast out to the people? Well, Anchor even distributes your podcast on all the biggest platforms such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can even profit from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Go download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.